this is Aaron Hobson with Red Hook Guitar. Today I'm going to talk about an 8-bar blues progression. Last video I talked about a 12-bar blues progression, so that one you are probably more familiar with. The 8-bar blues is a little less common, but it's still a lot of fun. Really, there are a lot of numerous variations on this progression. The 12-bar blues is more of a generic standard chord progression, and it has its variations, but you'll notice with the examples I'm about to give with the 8-bar blues, it has a lot more variation, a lot more boundaries to explore. So again, a bar in music is a measure, so we're talking about an 8-measure chord progression that keeps repeating. The main difference between the 12-bar blues and the 8-bar blues is just the time it takes to resolve. So of course the 12-bar blues is a 12-measure progression that keeps repeating, and the 8-bar blues is an 8-measure chord progression that keeps repeating, so that's a shorter length of time. The examples I'm going to give are still based on the 1-4-5 chord progression. If you don't know what that means, I've done previous videos on chord progressions and intervals, and even the last video I did on the 12-bar blues progression, we talked about a 1-4-5. So if you're unfamiliar with that, you can go back and review, but I'm assuming that you're going to be familiar with that by now because I've explained it quite a few times already. So anyway, the 12-bar blues is more of a generic specific pattern, and you'll see with these examples of the 8-bar blues it is not so much. It's not as standard. There's a lot of variation, like I said, so there's really no progression to point to and say, yeah, that's exactly the form you want to follow. But it's kind of fun when you're listening to blues and rock music, or music that's influenced by the blues in some way. You can listen to it. Is this a 12-measure pattern that keeps repeating? Is it an 8-measure pattern? I'm going to get to the next one, which is 16-bar blues, in the next video. But for now, we're just talking about the 8-bar blues. So when you're listening to blues music, you can kind of quiz yourself and say, is this 12-bar form? Is this 8-bar form? Is this 16-bar form? What is the form? What is the chord progression? It's kind of fun to be able to do that. So I already put up a video a while ago now of a great example of an 8-bar blues, Kryon by Eric Clapton. So let's see if you can see this on this paper. So in Kryon by Eric Clapton, we're talking about the key of A. So we have the 1 chord is A, the 4 chord is D, and the 5 chord is E. So here's the form that we're going to take with this particular blues progression. So you're going to have a 1 chord for 1 measure, the 5 chord for 1 measure, 4, 4, 1, 5, 1, 5. So in the key of A, it looks like this. You have A for a measure, E for a measure, D for 2 measures, then your turnaround, A, E, A, E. Alright, so I'll play it a little bit. So here's the A. In the E, he actually puts a G sharp in the bass. The D, he puts an F sharp in the bass. Remember, slash chords. Then regular A to the E. Then here's the turnaround, A, E, A. She's been crying, she's been crying, she's been crying all night long. She's been crying for her one and only son. She will weep. So it just keeps going around. That's your 8-bar form. So it's a cool song. I did a video of it. I'll link the video if you haven't seen it in the description, just to give an example of an 8-bar blues in A. Next one you might have heard of, Heartbreak Hotel by Elvis Presley. So Elvis does this in the key of E. So here's your 1-4-5. You've got E is your 1 chord, A is your 4 chord, B is your 5 chord. And here's the form, a little bit easier. You have your 1 chord for 4 bars, your 4 chord for 2 bars, 5-1 is your turnaround, and then back. So in the key of E, you see you have E for 4 measures, A for 2 measures, and then 5 chord, 1 chord, and it just keeps repeating. So if you haven't heard this song, you can look it up. None of these keys are very good for my voice. I don't have a low voice, so I'm going to try my best to sing these, but don't laugh. Well, since my baby left me, I found a new place to dwell. It's down at the end of Lonely Street at the Heartbreak Hotel. You make me so lonely, baby. I get so lonely. I get so lonely I could die. So again, you have E, 2, 3, 4, E, 2, 3, 4, E, 2, 3, 4, E, 7, and then the shuffle A, like a power chord shuffle for 2 measures, and then B7, and then to E, 2, 3, and back to the top. So that's your 8 measures. So that's a pretty famous song. There's another one you can check out, Key to the Highway. Big Bill Broonzy did it, but it's one of those standard songs. I mean, the Stones have done it, Clapton's done it. So that's another one in the key of A, and it actually follows almost the same form as Kryon. So I won't give that as another example. It's just another example of the same key and an 8-bar blues in that same form. Here's an old fingerstyle blues, Sitting on Top of the World by Doc Watson. I'm talking about 60s here. So in the key of E, which I'm going to do it in the key of E. I forget what key he does it in. Your 1 chord is E, your 4 chord is A, your 5 chord is B, and here's the form. You have your 1 chord for 2 measures, your 4 chord, your 1 chord, 5, 1, 1, 5, 1. So that's an interesting form. So you have E, puts a dominant 7 in there to make it a little more interesting, and then A, E, B7, E, E, B7, E. So it's more of like a finger style. It was in the spring, one sunny day, my sweetheart left me, thought she went away, and now she's gone. Don't worry, Lord, I'm sitting on top of the world. So you have E to E7 to A, back to E, then E to B7, then E, B7, back to E. So if you're not familiar with any of the songs, you can look them up, you can listen to them, you can learn them, you can try to play them, or just for theoretical purposes, you can just try to analyze them. So I'm just going to give one more example here. This one's in the key of G. This is George Thorogood, Get a Haircut and Get a Real Job. So, your 1, 4, 5 in G, your 1 chord is G, your 4 chord is C, and your 5 chord is D. So here's the form of this one, really super simple. You have your 1 chord for 4 measures, your 4 chord for 2, and your 5 chord for 2. So you have G, 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 C, C, D, D. So, in this one you got G, 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 C, C, D. So, get a haircut and get a real job. Clean your act up and don't be a slob. Get it together like your big brother Bob. Why don't you get a haircut and get a real job? So that's kind of how that one goes. So it's a super simple example. So you can see there's no real one progression to point to and go, that's an 8-bar blues. Really, the criteria are, it's still based on a 1-4-5, although, you know, when you get into a little bit more complicated theory, you understand that that's not always true, but most of the time it's true. And it's just an 8-measure form, like, you know, in a blues style that just keeps repeating. So there's really no one example to point to, because you'll see through these progressions that they're all very different. Some other examples you might want to check out are Cross to Bear, the Allman Brothers, It Ain't Nobody's Business If I Do, and that's a real standard. I mean, you can find everyone from like Billie Holiday up to like Eric Clapton doing that one. So there's lots of examples out there. So again, 8-bar blues is just an 8-measure chord progression that keeps repeating. Still basing it off of the 1-4-5 in these examples. And the form can be pretty loose, you know. In terms of the examples I've given, you can see there's a lot of variation, there's a lot of boundaries to explore. And again, it's kind of fun. If you're listening to blues music, you can kind of quiz yourself. Is this an 8-bar form? Is this a 12-bar form? I'll get into the 16-bar form, you know, and kind of analyze the chord progressions that are going on. So anyway, hope that was helpful. See you next time.